Kia ora, and welcome to my AAR or After Action Report for Imperial Diplomacy World of Chaos. I am Dyer and I was playing the centre of Debre, Birhan in East Africa. This is both intended as an AAR for this game along with being generally about this game as a whole. If you were playing in this game and I don't mention during this video, I apologise. There were 345 players at game start, and additionally there were 12 years of play. So if I didn't mention you, I do apologise. So with you looking at the map, you may notice there are some differences from normal diplomacy. The first obvious difference is that it's a world map. Imperial diplomacy is set in the 1640s, as you can see here. As unfortunately you can't see in this specific map. It's in the 1640s. Specifically, the start date is 1640 for kind of everything. However, this variant is different to normal Imperial diplomacy because this is a chaos variant. Chaos variants means that each different supply center itself has a different player playing it. So, for example, in the UK, one moment, you can see there will be a different player in Edinburgh, Oxford, London, and Plymouth. I will just say thank you very much to Emu, who played Comanton in this game, for letting us use their alliance maps that will come up later on, as well as the GMs for posting all these maps, so that way I can go over them. Moving on, so back to Chaos. So every single player, one supply center. That leads it to a bit of a Thunderdome, Hunger Games style kind of game, where it is a winner takes all, you grow or you die. What we will see is that myself, sitting in Debre Birhan, right at the start of the game starts, my goal was to live. Shocker. What I could see here when I looked at the map was that I saw this big ring of dots around me with a border of non-supply centers in this little core. I picked scrap, I'll be clear. I didn't pick Debre Birhan, I just got it. I was just happy to play. With Debre Birhan, my first goal was to ally with this set of players here and to basically control this corner and try to dominate this area and into Arabia. So how did that go game start? So game start wise, what we saw was the formation of a couple of alliances. Thankfully, right at the start, my neighbours next to me immediately went, hell yeah, we're in. So we formed a little group here. We additionally, along with Sanaa and Aiden across the sea, we decided to form. They decided as well to join our alliance because we viewed, if we're going to be fighting over the Gulf of Tadora and the Red Sea, we might as well do it together instead of as multiple different players where no one's going to get anything done and we're just going to get eaten by a larger power. So that worked out great. Wasangli here joined a different alliance, which was the Pirate Parley, which consisted of all of these players down here. They were sort of our southern neighbours, and right at the start we had some pretty good relations with them, which is really nice to see. They were kind of set up as sort of like they were like organised, but at the same time all their players could kind of go do their own thing, which was very nice for them. They also had votes and elections, which is very different to a lot of other alliances in Africa. How was EG run, or Evergreen, which was the name of our alliance, which, as you can see, was right here. We had a little emoji of the Evergreen ship in the Suez Canal, which was pretty cool. I believe it was Michele who designed it. Going on, so how were we organised? We weren't really that organised, I'm going to be honest. At the start, we kind of all just agreed that we'd rather not fight each other and we'd just rather work together, especially when we saw that to our west, this entire group here was forming its own coalition called Lock. Now, Lock was special because they only had landlocked players. Now, landlocked players means, one, you can't build fleets, so you're only building armies, and that was a bit of concern to everyone else because fleets can go to a different continent and go fight. You know, Hobyo Marig, they can go to India and fight. and that means Mogadishu and Baidoa, they're not really too concerned about their own home dots. Meanwhile, Locke was completely, they had to go in a direction, and it was going to go into one of the alliances. As we would later find out, they would decide to go east into Evergreen. But yes, so Evergreen wasn't necessarily run. I was appointed as its ambassador in the first year, which is very much just I was pressing a lot until like, you're going to be the person to talk to everyone. And I was fine with that. I loved doing the press. In terms of our players, I was in a different time zone to a lot of them, so it was working out, was pretty cool. But Gonda, great player, lots of good kind of methodical thinking about plays and moves, loved their analytical. Exum, someone who was actually in my time zone-ish, got along very well with them. McKelly, great player, didn't talk as much as maybe the other two, but they trusted us enough to then, in winter, to build a fleet, which was perfect. Now, what we had decided as an alliance early on was we needed gains, because you don't win, you don't grow as an alliance, and you basically, if an alliance doesn't grow, it's going to fall to stabbing pretty quickly if it isn't growing. So what we said is, McKelly, we're going to get you Mahra here, because the thing about Arabia was they weren't organized at all. It was partly due to the fact that they just weren't really pressing as much. But for instance, there was lots of press around this region, but as an Arabian whole, there was barely any press. And I think that was mainly due to them being very much stuck between three different kind of big Discord group channels, because you had the Asian group, the European group, and the African group. So they never had a really good chance to like coalesce. But what we saw was that Mahra was by itself, and that Riyadh just wanted a vibe. Riyadh borders a lot of regions, they just wanted to chill out. And so what we decided to do was we were going to get McKelly in first year to take Mahra, where McKelly would move to the Gulf of Torah, Aiden would move to Katheri, and then Aiden would support McKelly in, thus giving us our first dot and our first growth, which is crazy. At the same time, Locke in the west, they had kind of been having a long conversation about who they were going to attack. And if we look at the alliance map, you can kind of see their position. So how it looked was, you had Locke, you then had Conga Line to the south. Now Conga Line, pretty immediately, they wanted to go south into Mutapa. Mutapa kind of looked a bit scary at the start because of their size, because of how big their supply centers looked, and because they just organized a little bit faster than, I'm going to be honest, lots of other African alliances. But they generally were they weren't necessarily aggressive as well, they were just kind of vibing in the south. But Conga Line, they were small, they were feisty, and they were going to try to grow. Pirate Parley, they were kind of chilling out. They were kind of still waiting to see if they could trust each other. Marina was very new, again, didn't trust each other very much. Guinea Pigs, very small, but they were part of Western Star's plan for Western Drift. Now, what Western Drift was the idea that Western Star, Guinea Pigs, the Conga Line, and maybe Locke at the end, would eventually migrate / do a continental invasion of South America and of the Hive specifically. Did that come to pass? Yes. Did it work out? Yes. But what it did mean was Locke was looking for targets at the start. You had Western Star, this pretty big power in the west, who was going west. They weren't a threat to Locke. You had Guinea Pigs, who were basically allied with Western Star. So if Locke tried to fuck with Western Star, they were gone. You had Locke maybe go against Conga Line with Mutapa, but that never really went anywhere because the Conga Line and Western Star were again working on Western Drift. So what Locke then decided was the only way to go was east. And so they decided to push east. And you can see that with the builds. Obviously, they're all land armies, so they have to build armies. But they very much, if you can see here, they very much form a little ring around poor old Evergreen here. If we move on to spring moves, as you can see here, there was lots of plans for bounces. So you have myself moving to Michele. This was as a sort of a trust exercise. I kind of didn't really have anywhere else to go, and so I was going to go there, and then I'm going to go out basically. You had Axum move to Gojam to basically support, because we thought, oh, they're going east. We need to be on the lookout for this. What happened here is a bit disputed. Hawara and Gondar had agreed to basically bounce in Sanaa. Hawara then went, nope, no bounce, and then moved in there anyways. And that really struck a real big tone. What else you can see here? You can see this bit of a fight between Cairo and Mecca. Cairo and Mecca had kind of had a love-hate relationship. They were both Arabian/African powers that both pressed a lot, which was very different to the rest of Arabia. And as a result, they were also jostling for position within the kind of Arabian food chain. So they really just did not like each other. Riyadh supported Cairo into Mecca, while Mecca was trying to get Mahra into Riyadh. Obviously, Mahra decided to evacuate, as there was a very wild plan for them to eventually migrate into this area here, into the Gulf, while Cairo took Mecca. I believe after this, Mecca subbed out, and they had a sub for the next year. Otherwise, EG plans went well. We had the support into Kathiri. Kathiri was going to support Gulf of Tidora into Mara. Wasangali was vibing, going into Socotra, going to go help us later. What we didn't expect, however, as Evergreen, was for the Pirate Parley, our supposed little neighbours in the southeast, to stab us. And that's what Marique did. As soon as they found out that they were going east, that Locke was going east into Evergreen, they went, right, we can get some dots. And so Marique moved into Gala, and their press very much turned more negative against us. And so what you then had was very much a coalition against all the sort of players here. After spring, things were a bit tense for EG. It was very tense. So if we go to fall 1642 and look at the moves, apart from the various meme orders you can see onto, well, meme, who was playing Kanan Bornu, you can see that basically there were some pretty crazy moves. So from the southeast we have Pirate Parley, both moving to get themselves in position on our course. You can see both myself and Axum both tried to move back into our centres. Gojam to block a attack from Sanaa in. You can see me move from Michele back to Debre. You can also see a successful Aiden support into Mahra, while Socotra moves out into Dumblin, and Sanaa stabbing Aiden. This was our first, and I believe this was our first stab we had as EG internally, and it was a bit of a shock. To be fair, we expected one stab, but for them to stab them so brazenly in year one was brutal. Up in Arabia, we can see Levant supporting Mecca back into Mecca itself, which was being held by Cairo, while Riyadh was holding Mecca. In the west was where it was interesting. So this space, as we remember from the previous map, was all lock. However, what we saw in the orders was basically a big stab by Mandara here. What this led to was Mandara stabbing Darfur. Darfur was moving in, as was agreed by the Alliance, in. If it had, might have been the end of EG, frankly. but it wasn't, thankfully. What this resulted in was the collapse of Locke as a unit, basically, because Locke didn't want to work with Mandara, who was now Mandara Darfur. And as a result, their alliance collapsed. Additionally, in the west, we have Mali here, hitting Ulata and stabbing them in year 1. That additionally made WS have issues within their own alliance, which then meant that they weren't really focusing elsewhere. They were very focusing internally of what to do with Mali. Over here in EG, once we heard that Locke was breaking up, it was very much a sigh of relief, and then it was basically a scrabble to see on how many dots every single alliance could get. So who did we get? Well, we got someone people may not expect, which was Hawara. Now, Hawara previously had basically instigated the entire thing. They had moved into a DMZ province that had been agreeing to a bounce, and then not had been agreeing to a bounce. And they very much, you wouldn't expect them to join the alliance that they had just broken into DMZ with. They asked, however, as they could only really see themselves working with either us or Mamluks, and no one else here was kind of being that great. Guinea pigs, on the other hand, exploded in size. If we look at them from winter, they were this small, only about 3 provinces, 3 players, and they then exploded up. So they had, they took, as addition to their normal players, they additionally took Agades, Kenenbornu, as well as some others. What you'll notice here is that some players, however, still stayed neutral. TCL also grew some as well. That is to note, as they pulled a successful stab in year 1 and knocked Mutapa out of the war. Mutapa had quite a few defections to the Conga line, which then became renamed the line, or as we will now call it in the rest of this AAR, which is TCL. Rivenala formed, which was basically a response to this, which was Mutapa remnants plus what was left of Marina. Up in the northeast, Cairo basically formed Arrakis, along with other members, including Trebizond and Tbilisi. They formed Arrakis, which was going to be the Arabian alliance. You can see here on this map there's quite a lot of dual alliances. This is before EMU basically went everyone has to be only one alliance on the map or nothing. This is why you can see here that on this map you can see that we have Michele is also part of it, because Evergreen is diplomatically basically tried to get into Arrakis and have them a reason not to come after us, because by having a player inside their alliance. Arrakis was very much a response to EG and the United Nations of India expanding westwards and northwards respectively, and was basically to try and minimize other alliances encroaching into Arabia. It was not that effective, as we'll find out. Pirate Parley. If we look back in 4 moves, they moved against us. Obviously, not great from our end, and that basically cemented in our relations with them that we didn't want to work with them. Apart from Warsangli, that is. Warsangli was very much, I'm doing my own thing. We're keeping to ourselves, we're going to play for ourselves. While the rest of the Pirate Parley was not as kind of apologetic about trying to stab their kind of allies. So, going into winter builds, there wasn't that many winter builds, there wasn't really destructions. Cairo Grove, they built an army. Sinar built another army, which we were very pleased with. It was in a fleet, it couldn't contest us into Dora. The Mecha fleet was a concern to us, because the Red Sea could affect us and could affect Mekele. However, we had promised with Cairo, which I believe now became Mamluks, or Mamluks. If I do mispronounce things, I apologize. We promised that Red Sea would be DMZ. So, yeah. Otherwise, Mandara grew, and they didn't build an army, as well as Mali did. Now, this was in response to a lot of diplomatic pressure from a lot of different players, basically going, if you build another army, we'll coalition and destroy you. In Mali's case, it worked out for them. In Mandara's case, there were a lot of hungry players around them, and they will soon, I believe they did go on to regret it. So, looking at the players as it stands in winter, GP was now this entire section here, if you look at my cursor, with WS here, WDS in the corner, with Mali out, but Mali does rejoin WDS later. In Pirate Pale, you have Sidamo and Oromo armies, as well as these core territories here. And then TCL has expanded down to here, along with some Ravenala areas here. But what's critical was that Mandara, Darfur, Azande, and Banda were all neutral territories with no allegiance. I believe I may be miscorrect here. I believe Banda was part of TCL. Apologetically, they were a part of TCL for this portion. So, moving on to spring, what are our goals? So we're sitting here. First goal, Sanaa, move back to Hawara. We don't want any dramas. We don't want any trouble. Secondly, we want to get the Pali away. So what do we say to them? We go to GP. We go to the guinea pigs, which is this new alliance up here. We go to the line, and we go, hey, let's coalition Pirate Pali. And as part of that, let's have a three-way alliance. Now, both the line and guinea pigs will both say this is an incredibly unfair agreement to have a defensive pact where if, let's say, Evergreens attacked guinea pigs, then the line would join guinea pigs against Evergreen. That this was completely unfair and not worth it. But I do have to say it was a complete diplomatic coup by Evergreen here, because we were able to then sort of be able to reach an equal footing with the other alliances. Guinea pigs at this time was quite strong and quite clustered with lots of armies. While us and Evergreen, we were still sort of bunkering mentally. Lion again was also growing quite powerful, though they were distracted by going Western Drift as well as fighting Ravenala. However, we agreed to this, and we then decided to all coalition Pirate Pale. There was a vote on this in Evergreen, which did pass. We viewed basically their full moves as aggression against us that they shouldn't have done if we were good allies, and that their reasoning that they were doing it just to kind of, see, just because they wanted to get some dots wasn't kind of good enough. And as a result, we declared that we would go after them. And then this is then reflected in spring moves. So what you can see here is that in WDS, there's just some moving around. Not much is going over there. Over here, Mandara agreed to give up one of its dots to the Horsa States, which then moved into Mandara, while Darfur moved down to Azande. Azande was playing a very different game to everyone else, where instead of playing normal diplomacy, they were posting puzzles, and then if you finished the puzzle and you finished it first, and you posted your answer, Azande would allow you to pick their orders. It worked great in practice if you're part of an alliance of clever people, but generally didn't really work. As a result, I believe Bornu, either Bornu or one of the other players in GP won it, and so they decided, let's make Bornu go into Darfur, kick Mandara out of Darfur, and Darfur can go down to Azande. Mandara at this stage was kind of just wanting to live, and so I think they kind of were just happy to move down there. What's going on elsewhere? Sanaa's going back up to Hawara. This is partly in reaction to these Cairo moves. They want to move up. They want to basically just keep an eye on the border. An army in Cairo is a bit of a threat to EG. Mikaele moving up to the Gulf of Tirol with their second fleet. It's fantastic. Mara and Darnball Shore working together. This is another example of War Sangali. While we were at war with Pirate Parley, they were just kind of doing their own thing. And so they obviously supported Mara into Arabian Sea with the idea of us going raiding either in Uni, in India, or going against other Arabian territories. Over here, Arrakis was kind of strong, as you can see here, with them all just kind of grouped up, kind of together, just vibing. Riyadh, I think at this point, it's kind of stopped pressing as much. And Sanaa and Aden very much took along a bunker mentality. Obviously here, Oromo pulls back to Banyoro because they're concerned about TCL coming for them, while Sadamo moves to bounce me out. There's not really much else to discuss. If we go back into here, you can see kind of how it's kind of going into this area. You can see Arrakis here. It's growing quite big because of Cairo growing, but you can still see Evergreen still has a little pocket here. At this point, so Sanaa was not kicked out of EG immediately. However, there was a lot of diplomatic pressure for Sanaa basically to pick one alliance. They were now, I believe, called Yemen, and they had changed their name as they had formed Yemen, the country. Due to that, they chose to stick with Arrakis, the Arabian power. And as a result, they left EG, while Mikaele, there was a point when Mikaele did become Arrakis, but then they decided to they're going to stick with EG, which frankly, better decision for them, because their core was in Mikaele. Going back to the things, in terms of elsewhere on the map that really is affected, we have Ligma growing. This is in Italy, they kind of formed up. Orthodox Juggernaut. So that was an alliance map of 3 different big alliance, formed a mega alliance. And they were just expanding out here. United Nations for India, they were also expanding out here and trying to take a large control of INO, which we can see. You can't really see it as well here, but they had a lot of fleets, and they were very prepared to use them. So let's look at fantastic fall moves 1643. Not what happens in 1643, nothing too crazy. You'll very quickly see here Azande's trying to live, sadly not. Everyone just support held, nothing really happened. Up elsewhere, we just had a bounce over Axum and Gojam. Not much happened there. It was just pretty much a safety bounce. Debre, Axum had requested basically to die. Axum decided that they didn't want to play, and that they'd now that EG was in a more safe position, that they wanted to kind of step out gracefully. They didn't want to sub out and then have another poor player would just get coalitioned. They didn't think that was fun, and so they decided to let Gondar, who then formed the Courier from taking Axum, to grow basically, and that's why they did that safety bounce to keep Gondar in Axum and Axum's army in Gojam. What did I do that turn? I kind of did nothing. I just kind of sat there. I was kind of sitting there on guard duty, just here, just in case something went wrong here and I had to come back up, but otherwise just kind of covering. What was an addition to what became known as the Pirate Parley Coalition was the inclusion of India, and you can see that clearly with its fleet here. This fleet here is not African. It is in fact from Sakalava and was trying to stay alive while going to Marique as part of India. Sadly, it didn't make it, but it was good effort. What you can clearly see here is you can see Pirate Parley trying desperately to hold on to what they have and try not to lose dots. Over in good old Arabia, what do we have going on here? We have a Riyadh Tribzon bounce not much going on here. Meanwhile, Cairo expands into Tripoli. Nothing too crazy here. This alliance here, which I'm just happy to show you, was called the Unnamed Alliance because they honestly just couldn't come up with a name. Nothing really happened with that alliance. I'm going to be honest, it completely fell apart and it was just their name only. And yeah, as a result, Cairo decided eating its members, basically. So Cairo expanded out this turn. We have Riyadh and Trebizond bouncing, and then we have Aden being convoyed out into Shakia to start their conquest over here. This was done under Iraqis auspices, I believe, and trying to organize it so that way these armies wouldn't just sit here and be a threat to Riyadh, that they could go and they could go expand somewhere else. EG was happy with that because their armies not being here was just better for everyone, frankly. So, moving on to winter builds. Not much happened. Well, not much controversial. Lots of armies being built. We lost at Zandeh. Axum died. Baidoa and Hobyo both built armies because they had gotten land in Moravi and in Sekhalava. Now, that was interesting because that put more armies on EG's doorstep, which is why we had an extra Gondar army. And very much got us onto we need to wipe out Pali now before they grow too big. Up here, just a rustic army. And what you'll notice here is that Mamluks waved. That was critical for us because we viewed basically an army build in Mecca threatens Riyadh. A fleet build threatens the Red Sea and would be basically just an absolute no-no. So, go into spring, what are our goals? Go into Pirate Pali, try to do some damage, try to get some dots. And that's really what happened at the start. You'll see a lot of fleet moves. You can see here, Uni is starting their expansion out. You can see these fleets starting to move. You have Wasangali and them doing little bounces and going across places. While Mekele's fleet moved out, you can see Actum shifting to Mekele to basically get into the fight. Trebizond moves into Mecca here. I don't know if it was a bounce or if it was agreed or what happened there, but they did. Hawara supporting, basically this was one big long attack line that was just support. Nothing that interesting here, frankly. Meanwhile, what you have here is you have Mandara, now Azande, trying to basically break to the shore. And so they were supported by myself into Romo. This was done as well to basically have a neutral power in a Romo instead of having Pirate Pali power. You can see Pirate Pali dots moving up, and you can see more fleets moving around. Going into fall moves, you can see just a little bit more trickiness. Lots of weirdness with Mandara, people moving out, people moving in. This was done mainly to try to give lots of people with an even share of dots so one power couldn't grow too crazy. That was in pretty much direct contrast with India, which with Masulipatam, which was trying to do kind of like they were like the big power and then everyone else was kind of one dots. You can see here, little cheeky little stab here by Duthar into Mara. Oh well, it is what it is. It's an R trying to grow. You can see you can see right here. You can see Wasangali getting to Muscat, and you can see over here is a failed bounce on Hobyo. But what this did allow us to do was to move Mekele and to Orsa. Gonda basically stayed where they were because of this meme position, and Hawara attacked Dafur to make sure that it couldn't do anything sneaky. Otherwise, nothing simple here. This Trebizond unit here tried to go into Riyadh. I believe in hindsight that this was actually a forced dislodge and they're trying to get a fleet here, which I think we'll see in builds. But otherwise, EG is just trying to move up against Pirate Pali. TCL is just finishing off Ravenala. They're doing a great job at it. Going into full retreats, this is what we got. You can tell Ravenala's pretty much gone. What's happened is that the Marina Dominion, which was Madagascar if we remember, basically defected fully to India, which then meant that India tried to get more involved in the fight against Pirate Parley. You can see here that Arrakis is still kind of alive, but a large proportion of their members have defected to Butlerians. If we remember the big the Orthodoxy, they basically all split up here. You can see the big felines, they all split up again. Ligma has grown, they've taken Mamluks now. Evergreen's still there, guinea pigs are still there. There's not much else will change. So, this is winter builds. This was critical. It was an Aiden fleet. This fleet here was pretty much a direct threat and basically, frankly, sealed Aiden's and Yemen's fate, basically, by trying to contest us. They basically signed their death warrant. What is interesting here is that actually they didn't disband. Tamaha stayed. I think they were going to use it to go into Sana'a, and it was just to be an extra army. You can see here that Agadir has gone into Tripoli, and so Cairo hasn't had to do a disband, and it's just chilling. Agadir had very good relations with Ligma as the alliance, and so they sort of worked together there. Otherwise, there's not much else that's happening. You'll notice there are some dots like this build marker. That was because there was an issue with a bot. Going to spring move 1645. EG goals once again, get towards Pirate Parley, make some ground against Yemen. Otherwise, basically hold all the rest of our borders. As you can see here, right now it was a bit tense because you can tell we had both Darfur and a Dinka army, both on our borders, which was a bit concerning to both Hawara and Gondar. So there was a little bounce here. Over here, somebody bust. This was a UNI unit trying to get into Marig, while they did some more fleet movements around here. So Zanzibar here is part of UNI. Sorry, it's part of Pirate Parley. So this is definitely trying to push them in. While EG here is trying to push Debre Birhan into Sadamo, i.e. me. Here we're trying to split ourselves into Aden to try to get some positioning on Mara, Aden, and just gets moved. You can see Riyadh here trying to support to Sana'a. It becomes a bit of a cage fight here. Moving to 4 moves. What happens here? So Agadir gets subbed out in 4, and basically it just happens that the poor Agadir sub basically just gets a little bit bullied, frankly, and they move to Hogar, and Horsa moves up and stabs them while the other unit's knocked out, and that's how Agadir dies. Hawara moves to Beha. To this day, I don't know why. Hawara moving to Beha was not planned by EG. It did very much cause some tensions with Cairo, and Ligma as a whole wasn't great. Frankly, I think Hawara was bored. What you see here is a very interesting move here. You have a Dinka trying to go into Gondar and go jam. What happened from this was that Dinka said that it was a way to stop Gojam from stabbing either myself or Mekele, and this was a way so that if Gojam had gone into Mekele or Debre, they wouldn't have got another build and they wouldn't have been out of spiral. Obviously, probably a bit of BS there, and it was just them trying to get a cheeky dot, but Gondar guessed it and got the right one. Over in Arabia, you can see Wasangali here working with you and I. At this point, Wasangali is still part of Pirate Parley, but they're just doing their own thing. Basically, Evergreen had said, "Look, we're not going to attack Wasangali. They're working with us everywhere else. We'll work with them. We don't want to attack them. If anyone else attacks them, we're coming after you." And that basically kept Wasangali alive. Otherwise, you can see us here. UNI is promising to move us into Marig and cut support to Thingwa also moves into Gullah, which was fantastic. Over here, you can see Komora C is going into Swahili, which was fantastic, and took Zanzibar. Other than that, what you have is this unit here, Bonyora, which I believe was the Mandara player, just trying to hold out They're just trying to escape, basically. Still trying to escape, not really getting anywhere. In the west, apart from that, just bounces. Nothing too interesting. We can, however, start to see this. There's a lot of fleet movement here, and a lot of attacks in. You can see here. So guinea pigs, they've expanded, and they now control some parts of South America. You will notice as well that this is a different faction. The bees split and formed and split and formed and split and formed again and again and again and again. It's something to be used to. They just like being a mega alliance, I guess, with something bee themed. They were now Byzantium. You can see Western Death Star is also located here and down here. Otherwise, looking at the rest of the alliance, you can see this is also the point where Pirate Party dissolves, because what you have here is you have in fall, you have Zanzibar being taken, you have Rig being taken, and what's left from that is you have a Hobyo, you have Mogadishu, and Burundi, and that's pretty much it. What this then, and it was one year, I should clarify, sorry. And what this then leads to basically is that Pirate Party just dissolves because they don't see themselves winning it. They've got Uni on one side, they've got TCL doing big attacks on the other side, and they've got GP doing sly attacks from the north. I will note here that this Azande right here, I believe that this was a GP player, but I can clarify that. Yes, was a GP player. I'm not sure who was the Azande player here. I think they might be a player from the west. Unsure. But as you can see here, big attack. Pirate Party falls. You can see here, Balearians expanded, Ligmas expanded Ligmas. Now there's kind of big power. UNI has also grown. You can see they basically split themselves into, they were so big, they split themselves into different, like, almost administrative districts. And so each district, as denoted by a different shade of orange, basically went a different way. So you have this group here that went to Asia, you have these groups here that went into Madagascar, and you have these groups that went east. Continuing on, we have winter builds. Nothing too fancy, just an extra army build. A lot of disbands from various players. You can see because Sanaa got taken, Yemen had to do a disband, and this was very much their death knell. Zanzibar taken by UNI. Moving on to the next one. There was some diplomatic stuff going on here, frankly. If I can show you the previous map, you can't see it here, but there was a UNI dot right here on my cursor. Africa in general, a large proportion of African players didn't like other alliances from other continents coming on. Very hypocritical, seeing Western Drift, I know. And so we organised a big dot swap with United Nations India. We would give India our dot here in exchange for this dot here. This worked out in the end, and was, I think, honestly on great benefit. Uni felt more safe here, we felt more safe here. They didn't have a bit of a bridgehead in, and likewise neither did we. Going into spring moves, it's kind of just cleanup mode, frankly. Again, nothing really happening in West Africa. In East Africa, lots of movements. What we can see here is, again, Mandara just trying to get away, frankly. Trying to get into Baidoa. It's unfortunately not successful. You can see UNI starting to pivot out, starting to move out into India. What's happening at the moment is I believe they're starting a fight with the NTF faction in the east, so they're starting to move fleets out that way. Otherwise, finishing off, going to Hobyo, Mogadishu is trying to protect their dots, and in Arabia there's just supports in and out into various other dots. I think Yemen had stopped doing press at this point, so they were kind of just gunboating. You can see here Hawara just moving back into Tiger. I think they were honestly matte painting at this point. Unsure why they didn't move back into Hawara. There could have been another reason for that. Gondar moving back to Gojam moving back into Gondar. That was basically because of a Hawara issue that we were concerned that Ligma would come down south, and then I moved up there just in concern about these moves. You will note this was after the Dinka Gojam bounce on Gondar, so we were basically just trying to make sure that Meme playing Kanan Bornu wasn't going to try anything. 4 moves. Once again, sort of clean up. You will notice, I believe this is the second. There's more holes from Cairo here. Additionally, what's happening in the east? So we have Mara being supported out. This was very cheeky by Yemen. Thankfully, it didn't work, so Riyadh tap. Sinar got supported into Aden by Wasangali, and Wasangali supported themselves into Rustak, while Zanzibar was taken by Kismayo army, which basically was the start of it. What then happened wasn't agreed, where Seychelles Sea was supported into Mogadishu by Swahili Coast. Obviously, it was great for you and I to attack and help take out Parapali, but we never promised in this dot. And then this additionally was an additional reason for the dot swap. Otherwise, not much happening here. You can see Bonyara here is getting supported into Baidoa by Mogadishu. I think Mogadishu had kind of given up at this point. Mandara, who is now in Bonyoro, had joined Pirate Parley for a section of time and became their leader, in fact, for I believe a year. If this is the correct year, at 1646, yes, they joined it. I believe they were the leader for this year of Pirate Parley, or 2 members, I think, or 2 or 3 members. And so they moved to Baidoa to hopefully escape. I believe at the end of this year, they then joined UNI as in United Nations of India, and they were basically trying to stay alive. Otherwise, what's happening here? Azandi's moving out. There's south bouncers in the west. Again, nothing much happening. There's a lot of focus here over growth, and additionally into WDS. So, going to winter builds. We have a Wasangali fleet build. This was just to increase our fleet builds. A Makele fleet build, Army Mecca, and an Army Hawara. What you didn't notice, or what I didn't mention, was that Tiger was supported into Axum. This was done basically as a dot kind of sharing measure, because Gondar was gathering Marig, and so we decided to give Hawara a dot. Basically, means you're not sitting on 1 dot, means you're not gonna die with 1 stab. Everyone was happy. Very good. All of EG at this point. At this point, we had also gotten Wasangali into the alliance. Was on 2 dots. That was 2 dots or more, and that was great for us. This was definitely our happy time. That was our winter builds. Nothing otherwise too crazy. Lots of disbands from dead players. Going to spring moves. What's EG's plan here? EG's plan here is frankly to stab Cairo. Mamluks at that point in time wasn't we had like a love-hate relationship in EG and Mamluks. They were sort of our power to the north that could bring a lot of pain on us, especially as we were focused south at the time, and so we tried to be nice to them. When Locke had tried to first fight us, we had tried to call a defensive pact with Cairo, and Cairo went, nah, not my problem. So there was a little bit of antipathy there. Otherwise, they were sort of contesting us in Arabia, and so was that issue. So what you can see here is a bit of a mega stab here. What we did was that we basically said, look, everyone, if you break DMZs, that's bad, but we're not going to punish you for it, which basically worked in our favor. And as you can see here, there was a bit of a mega push here, where Makele moved to Red Sea, Axum moved to thing, and what this gave us was this brilliant, fantastic positioning. Because while you have Mecca Mecca now in Cairo, you have Cairo and Tripoli, so you have a 3 on a 3. It's still a fantastic position, and you have Meme here, who's also very willing to go north into Cairo. What's happening at the same time is that Ligma, the alliance, if I just go back to my latest alliance map, Ligma here has attacked Gibraltar in Western Death Star. This then brought guinea pigs against Ligma, who then called Evergreen against Ligma. Evergreen we didn't say yes, basically, but you can see by the moves that we were going to fight them, and this was part of our big strategy: get some dots, get Mecca Cairo, expand a bit. At the same time, what you see here is you see the Butlerian faction, which is all these players over here. We're trading with them Aden and Sanaa for Muscat Rustak, while UNI moves out of Mogadishu in exchange for, I believe it was Muscat. Mandara here, again, still trying to live. They're trying to be convoyed out. You can see Burundi here being supported in. Burundi was supposed to take Baidoa here, which then causes issues later for fall, which I'll get to. Over here, for fall, nothing too crazy. You can see some moves going around. Mali moving here. It's just trades, dot swaps basically. Nothing too crazy. Going to full moves. So starting up in Arabia. Tripoli is busy focused having to defend against Hogar. Tap. Meanwhile, you can see right here the full EG force goes into Cairo. At the same time, the dot swaps finish, where Rustak moves out, Ada moves in, Sanaa's taken. This is a stab here from Trebizond into Riyadh. Riyadh was not supposed to die here, but Sanaa still gave it a good damn try. And frankly, they got themselves an extra dot. Over here in the east, this was a big contentious thing where you and I, as part of Baidoa, basically wanted Baidoa to live, and so they wanted me to basically support hold Baidoa and keep them safe from these players, from TCL. However, as part of the split that we had when we agreed to coalition pirate play together, TCL was given Baidoa as a dot, and as a result I supported them into Baidoa. The Mandara player was a sub of Mandara. They were thrown into that sub position from after Mandara stabbed in year 1, and they had played all the way from Mandara here, from Darfur up here. They'd migrated themselves down all the way to Baidoa themselves without being killed as a neutral player, and to their credit, they did very well for staying alive as long as they did. Over here, Hobio takes Marig. This is just a bounce in case of Bunyara. Meanwhile, what's going else? This is where things get a bit crazy. So at the very same time, you have 3 different players do stabs. You have Benin in the west, stab into WDS. So guinea pig stabbing into West WDS. You have an internal GP stab going into Benin itself. So this is Fernando Po here, going into all these players. Fernando Po also stabs Bornu here, while Bornu stabs Hawara in EG. So you have a guinea pig stab on EG, you have a guinea pig stab on EG, a guinea pig stab on WDS, and a guinea pig internal stab, which is pretty crazy. Yes, and so moving on to the alliance, you can see here clearly this had some repercussions down the south. Oh, that actually brings me to a good point, actually. I forgot to mention. TCL, they basically declared war on India and went, give us Madagascar, or we're just going to deathball you. At the moment, at that point in time, UNI was busy fighting MTF here. and as a result, you and I basically gave them up. To needless to say, this player not happy about that, but in the end, TCL took 2 dots there. Fernando Poe, this is before everything happened. So what happened here? Ligma and Evergreen, we pieced out basically at that point. Everything was fine. We had taken our dots. At that point, Mamluk still existed in Mecca at that point in time. At the same time, Fernando Poe basically became the dominant power in the Central. There was basically agreements to coalition Fernando Poe, which then led to issues for all these neutral players on the side of which side they were going to join. Benin, who's up here, they basically flirted with a bunch of different alliances. They went to Ligma for a portion of time. They were going to work with Poe for a bit of time. They were going to work with TC, with the line against Poe. They were going to be with Western Death Star for a time. This was all within like one phase, but in the end they decided to work with Ligma. Evergreen, we grabbed Kanan Bornu off that by a unanimous vote, even though they had stabbed us the year before. It's just kind of an EG thing. We just kind of grabbed our stabbers. And so going into winter builds, it's a lot. This was very critical. Was what was the build Mecha was going to do, because they build army, that could be a problem. But it's not as bad as a fleet, because the fleet is just contesting us, contesting EG. So then building Mecha was fine. At this point in time, we're trying to get Meme another dot somewhere else, preferably to go back into Kanan Bornu, while Birhan can move back into Hawara to basically even it out. Otherwise, what's going on here? Baidoa's in over here. Nothing that interesting here, just some builds. Mandara built armies to defend themselves. Benin was stacked up on WDS. Ligma was here. Going to spring moves. You can see here, basically there was an agreement here to dislodge Cairo. This was between Ligma and EG. Basically, EG went, hey look, we'll take Mecca. You guys can have Cairo back. And that was agreed. I believe this was also a turn where Mekele either held or NMR'd, which also happened. Otherwise, not much specifically happened. We kind of held here. There was movement around here. There was just dot swapping going on here. Over on this side, you have Benin, who is still trying to attack into WDS, along with Ligma, as Ligma is at that point in time also fighting them, while Poe is trying to play defense and trying to gain some dots. Going to forward moves, you can see here that the EG army here, it retreated into the Levant and then moved into it may have retreated, could be incorrect here. Either way, I believe the previous map was incorrect. It actually convoyed itself around into Mecca, I believe. Regardless, this then happened. It was just a bunch of support holds. Nothing really interesting there happened. What you see here is Abbasids cementing themselves in here. Lots of armies moving around here. Beha retaking Hawara. Cairo now chilling. I believe this was their second NMR. Wasangli taking Aiden. Nothing much going on with my units. My units very much here were playing support roles. So you can see here I was just moving, just making sure I wasn't threatening anyone. All these units just support hold. Over here, just attacks in. Nothing too crazy, just attacks into Benin. While Ligma had their fight. Winter builds. Exum build army. Nothing too crazy. Another Wasangale fleets. Moving into spring moves. 1649. Again, still a bit of a Thunderdome in the west. Not really confident of how it all was working, so I can't really comment on it. I know that Bornu was going to Agadir. This became complicated after a while, which I will then go into. I'll explain later in full moves. Nothing really happening here. This is another NMR from Cairo, which started to really irritate the leader of Ligma, which was Sardinia here. Nothing much happening here. People just moving around. Yeah, nothing too crazy. Units moving around. We have Uni moving in. This is part of a Uni kind of counterattack into TCL, which it was at this very specific turn that EG had been trying to, myself specifically, had been trying to DMZ a lot of these areas here, so then moving into it really didn't help our relations. Over here, nothing specifically happened. It's just a lot of bounces trying to protect dots, basically. So now moving to Dinka, I believe this was breaking a planned bounce, but I'm unsure. Axum moving into Makali, this is them just supposed to shift around into Ossa and then come south, or to be convoyed into Arabia. Going into fall, as you can tell, lots of crazy dots, but we're going to ignore a lot of them. You can see here, this is UNI trying to push themselves into Madagascar. Otherwise, not much happening. We basically retraded back dots. Axum Gondar, who is now Mercuria, basically went, hey, I will give you, I will take Debre, Birhan, you take Marig. That means I can do a nice formable, you can do a nice formable. Fantastic, right? And so that happened at the same time. Hawara gave me a dot, and they convoyed themselves into Wasangli's dot in Aden. Not entirely sure why this was agreed by Wasangali, but it happened. Otherwise, it was the death of Cairo. So, Cairo at this point had NMR too much, and Sardinia decided, nope, that was too much. And so they decided that it was time for their death. And so you can see here, our Hawara army unit, supported Makeli into Cairo. They was bouncing Cairo, while Tripoli tried to save themselves in Tunis, but was bounced out and then dislodged. Otherwise, not much, just a bounce over Darfur. At this point in time, Benin here does not have a dot, and such. Benin here, you can see they're in Mali, but they go incredibly dislodged here. It was brutal. Benin goes to House of States, and they decide to start their pilgrimage. They were in Benin here, and their plan was to go to Tripoli. Now, they could go this way, but basically Meme didn't want them there. So the next plan was to go like this, all around, and that will become the next kind of running thing you'll see here. Going into Winterfields, there isn't really much, just another Meme army build here. I finally got myself a fleet, which I was very happy about, but at the same time there are UNI fleets here. Makali got themselves a fleet, which was just basically a replacement for a Wasangli fleet that was dislodged. What is critical to understand here is at that point in time, UNI basically had made zero progress against TCL. They gained no dots. There wasn't basically a lot. They were kind of stalemated each other. And so UNI basically went to TCL and went, hey, do you want to take EG together? And TCL went to EG and went, nah, we're not going to attack you. And as similar response, UNI came to EG to attack TCL, and we basically went, we're staying out of this. We don't like TCL, they're this big power in our south. We don't like UNI, they're a big power in our east. We just kind of want to be left alone. We're going to manage our business. We're kind of focused elsewhere. UNI didn't like that, and as a result, they did become hostile in their press. Moving on into, so you can see alliances. You can see Evergreen has grown, Guinea Pigs has shrunk. Guinea Pigs doesn't really exist. This is just kind of one player, Poe, I think at this point. And I think a couple of remnants, or like one dotters. Western Destar, as you can tell, the bees have retaken all their land. They've also been invaded by Canada. Ligma has expanded, as Benin, as we discussed earlier, who was doing the pilgrimage, they joined Ligma. going into spring 1650. So what happens here? We have a dislodge from Al Hajara into Mecca. This is designed so that way Mecca can get themselves a fleet. Hawara reconvoys themselves back to Ossa. This is basically because of extreme tension with TCL, which is why we have a bounce at Sadamo. We have a lot of weird supports. There's lots of bounces here with us, with EG trying to gain kind of areas here. Horsa moves into Mandara with lots of support by Meme and Kenan Bornu. Dinka taps Azande here. Nothing too critical. Moving into fall, this is where things get interesting. What we see here is one of the most nothing sabs I've ever seen. So right here we have Mecca moving out, the Macaulay fleet moving back out, while Red Sea moves to Gulf Stora, Gulf Stora goes to Socotra. But instead what we have here is we have Hawara trying to stab EG internally. Gondar guessed this and bounced them, and in this position where Debre Birhan was supposed to move to Sadamo to bounce Bunyoro, they stayed and stopped a tap. Otherwise here, we're trying right now currently, basically the idea was I would dislodge myself in Gojam, and I would move myself out of Marig, and I would then be able to build a fleet in Marig, which would help us take out Yudi. However, due to this basically happening, didn't happen, so because of the bounce, this unit didn't get dislodged. But here I moved into Sadamo, that just happened. What you can see here is we're just trying to force out the UNI armies from a coast, but UNI has too many fleets. Otherwise here, Mindara is now pilgrimaging into Darfur, while Darfur moves into Azande. This is part of kind of later trade deals because of the later Po dots. Basically they traded, we would get Azande, they would get Mandara, and then would swap it back at a later date. Otherwise, still a bit of a fight here, nothing much going on. Up in Cairo, again, nothing really that happening, everything's kind of chilling out. Going to winter builds, we can see there's an army Riyadh. This was not planned. It would come back to bite us in the ass. But I think was missed by a lot of players. It's just, oh, they were just building there because they had to. Otherwise, not much really to comment on. Going to spring moves. What we can see here, again, a bit of a brawl here of them trying to knock out Po. You can see Po basically going to Sao Tome. Hey, I just want to go live in Sao Tome. Can you let me just take your dot for you? Aja moved around. Moving around. Azanda here, this is the army moving to Lagone to then take Mandara. Kenan Banu finished up with Darfur, and Darfur moves to Hawara. This is now have a decision where Darfur will now try to go for Cairo. At the very same time here, we have a stab from Butlerians, where they move 3 armies against Arabia, basically block this Orsa convoy, and at the same time, they help you and I get against us and Mara. Other no news, I just move into Mogadishu, I move into Marik, sorry. We again bounce off you and I. Sanaa moves back to Romo, Dinka moves to Gondar, and Sanaa bounces with Darfur to basically make sure that this unit here will stay alive. Going to fall moves. See here, Cairo dislodged by Ligma units as well as Trebizond. Over in Arabia, you have Abbasids unfortunately getting into Mecca. Otherwise, Mara is at nothing happens. We were very concerned that we'd lose Mara here, but we didn't. And also gets into Aden to their own dot. This was done very much because the core EG here, myself and Gondar, we didn't want Hawara armies near us. And here you can see Hawara supporting Sanaa into Darfur, so that way Hawara keeps their dot alive, basically. Otherwise, nothing happening here. Baidoa bouncing, and there's not. Kia ora and welcome back to the AAR for Debre Birhan. as the rest was pre-recorded, this is the final year. As you can see, final year spring moves. We have Debre being supported into Hawara, while Hawara moved to Zagawa. This is part of the original plan for Benin to, instead of moving to Tripoli now, Benin is now going to go to Cairo. Not much to report on here. Over here, nothing too new. What was great to see here was that we didn't have a stab from TCL into my Mogadishu unit, even though UNI was going to support them. That was lovely to see. Banyaro even did a weird support here. Don't know why, but that's besides the point. Otherwise, Dumble and Shaw stayed alive because they were Riyadh moving to Kathiri. We had a Cairo move into Mecca, and a kind of just a Abbasid units just kind of keep flowing south. Aden moved to Sana'a, and Wasangali moved out to Gulf of Dora. I moved out of Axum into Gojam. This was part of an agreed move with the Gondar player here, who wanted to get this area for a formable. Moving on to fall moves, as you can tell, there was a bit of a joke about Kazan. Kazan was the only, I believe, unclaimed or a dot that hadn't really been claimed by a movement order, and so even a lot of people who didn't have units to do anything, such as myself and Gojam, we just submitted orders for it. Over the east, what's interesting is we had a big stab from Masuli into all their allies. Beware thou who leaves their home centers unguarded, I guess. To the south, nothing really happened in Arabia, just a lot of taps that didn't do anything. Otherwise, Hawara tapped back into Darfur, leaving Hawara themselves, which was an interesting move. Zagawa got supported into Cairo to complete their pilgrimage. Hawara was kicked out of Sana'a and Aden, and Mekele moved to Sana'a, Wasangali into Aden. This is the final map, come retreats, which I don't believe will affect anything really in Arabia, so it's time really to give my thoughts. This game's been a long game. It's been 12 to 13 weeks of my life that I've spent just playing this, along with other diplomacy games, but this was definitely the major, kind of my big focus. I'm glad to have made it to the end. Obviously, I'm only on 2 dots, not 3, but that's okay. I'm happy that I got through to making an alliance early on, and that we survived all the way up until the end. EG was one of the most stable alliances, I think. We never really flipped. TCL is probably the only other example of a really stable alliance. The Hawara stab was brutal, but apart from that, it didn't really affect us so much, I'm going to be honest. Wasangali, Mekele, and Gondar played really well for everything they did, and it was really great playing with them. Lots of shout outs to Meme and our West, who absolutely defied the creator curse and went kind of crazy towards the end. Got a lot of dots for themselves. Benguela in the south, who's this player. They were a really strong leader for TCL, and I really enjoyed working with them. WDS, Mali, I think, was their head presser. They were really good to work with too. Abbasids was really fun to press with, as was Tbilisi. They were just kind of memeing around most of the game, and it was really fun to just be around them. Overall, I'm happy with how the game went. I was never really trying to go for a solo, so this was pretty chill, and I really enjoyed that alliance play. I'm looking forward to the next Chaos game. What is coming up next is that I'm hoping to start an interview series with a number of players and just kind of interview them for their games, and just kind of go over how the games went and how they went, and so I'm looking forward to that. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching my AAR, all a million hours of it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.